section of today will be a panel of growers talking about their experiences with undervine management. And for this panel, we will have Keith Abels from Sonoma RCD as the moderator. And we will have members from different vineyards around the North Coast. We will have Carrie Flores from Robert Sinsky Vineyards, Ned Horton from Turley Vineyard Wine Cellars, and Stewart Bewley from Alder Springs Vineyards. So Keith, please take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Miguel, for introducing the program. And thank you very much to our panelists. We have three really great growers here to share their experience of managing under the vine. How to best manage under the vine is a big question for really all growers. So it'll be great to hear their perspective. And we definitely want folks' participation and questions. So in the bottom right of your screen, please enter the question and answer, any questions you have. And after you will hear from each panelist. Each panelist is going to get 5 minutes to kind of share their thoughts and perspective, tell you a little bit about where they're farming. And then we have a set of question and answers that I will be asking that we already have prepared. And then we will have question and answer from the group. So please put your questions there. And with that, let's hear from Carrie Flores first about her experience with under the vine management. Thank you, Carrie.
Hi. Thank you for having me here. This has been a very interesting symposium so far. I tuned in yesterday and really enjoyed that. And so I just wanted to talk about Robert Sinsky Vineyard's experiences from transitioning from conventional to organic. Our oldest vines were planted in 1990, and Rob Sinsky came to Napa Valley from New York City, where he was a fancy photojournalist, and he was going to help his family start vineyards. And of course, he knew nothing about vineyards, and so they farmed, what is called conventionally, from 1990 through that whole decade, conventionally. And in the 90s, there were 2 100-year floods, one in 1995 and one in 1997. And they were doing the whole undervine strip spray with Roundup, like everybody who comes to Napa Valley, they want to know what equipment you're going to use for your strip spray. And so what they found was that this was out on Las Amigas Road in Carneros. And they found that their soils just washed away in any heavy rains and just washed on down to the swamp. And so around the same time, they had a young winemaker come. He was like the youngest winemaker in Napa Valley at the time, Jeff Vernig. And Rob and Jeff were soon to be new fathers, and they were interested in nutrition for their children. And Jeff was kind of a proponent to Rob for going organic, and he was also a follower of Rodale, J.I. Rodale, the original founder of the Rodale Institute. And so he proposed to Rob to go organic, that they were seeing a lot of benefit to the soil to retain their soil and not have it wash away by using weird things at the time, like cover crops and no-till systems. And so Rob, was amenable to trying different things at the time. So they started doing what became regenerative agriculture, even though there wasn't a name for it. And they started doing things like agroecology before there was even a name for it. So in 2000, they decided to go fully certified organic. And then there was another 100-year flood in 2005. And they found that the soil stayed in place with organic cover crops and not strip spraying. So what we do for under vine now is, not probably what most people would call economically feasible. We use Pelonk sunflower under vine cultivators. We have a Fisher mower that mows under the vine. We chop all of our prunings in place with flail mowers. And we found that, we've gotten more efficient at it. And yes, the Pelonk under vine cultivators are a little pricey and a little difficult to maintain, especially now that they're discontinued. But we make it work, and we find that we're able to farm, fairly economically feasibly with using these methods instead of strip spray. And it has benefited our vineyards enormously. I see about a foot difference in the soil height between our conventionally farmed neighbors and our vineyards, where their soil just continues to be lost through erosion and runoff, and all of the plowing and disking that they do. That's another thing that we don't do. We do just conservation spading every other row on our flatter blocks, the less than 5% slope. And then we have no till on our hillside vineyards. And that has made a huge difference. In 2001, we incorporated sheep, and everybody's worried about salt content, but we found that our salt content actually dropped after we started incorporating sheep and using less chemical fertilizers. Our nitrogen levels have stayed stable, even though we only apply compost and sheep deposits to our vineyards.
Great, Carrie. You have another minute or two, but are you done?
I think I'm finished for now.
Okay, that's great. There'll be more questions for sure.
Right.
We're going to hear next from Ned Horton from Turley Wine Cellars. I have had the good fortune to know Ned for a while. I first met him when I was with the Santa Rosa Junior College Vit class that visited his vineyard, and I thought he had a great program going and was very coherent. But then I've got to work with him quite a bit when he was with Quivira in Sonoma County, and he has had a lot of experience with under the vine management, organic management, and trying different things. So Ned, thank you very much for going out of your way to join us today, and take it away, Ned.
Excellent. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Keith, for having me. I'm, like Keith said, I'm a vineyard manager here at Turley. It's just about a year now, my first year here. Prior to that, 11 years in Dry Creek Valley working at organic sites. Here at Turley, we manage about 108 acres, 5 in Napa, 5 sites in Napa, 3 in Sonoma County, all CCOF certified. And what's particularly interesting about the sort of diversity here at Turley is vines from 4 years old to over 100 years old. So when you're working near the vines, especially with the old vines, you've really got to be kind of conscious of what you're doing. I thought the best way for me to kind of approach today's talk would be to go through the types of machines I've worked with for under vine cultivation over the year, and kind of give everyone a little explanation of how they work and what I see as benefits and kind of complications that can arise from using different approaches. So the first machine you see here is called a Gearmore Ho Plow. And I only actually have about 2 seasons worth of experience with this machine. It is very effective at moving dirt, soil out from under the vines to a pretty good depth. It's, leaves a very clean path in its wake. it can be kind of slow, and it requires a lot of attention from the operator. With this machine, the operator is actually going to be spending a lot of his day looking over his shoulder as he or she is driving. So it can be really kind of stressful physically on an operator. And as with most of these machines, the Gearmore can be really quite unforgiving if the sensor doesn't function properly and the plow ends up connecting with the vine. But the override on this is actually really quite responsive. So the downside of this one, and then also the next machine, which I have a photograph of, if we could see that. So this is another photo of the Gearmore, but then excuse me, one more, there we go. This is Agrafer Piccolo, which is a powered disc. This one has a relatively decent sensor and allows for a little bit speedier operation. So one of the sort of downsides in general of univine cultivation versus a commercial approach would be it does take time, much more time. So a machine like this with a good sensor is like kind of a valuable asset. But the downside to this approach, which I believe the next photograph can illustrate, which is also a downside to the first machine, the Gearmore. Could we please see the next picture? Oops. So it looks like we missed something in here. Sorry, there we go, that one, thank you. So is that you've got to put the soil that you remove from under the vines, or in this case, this looks like a, I got this image from the internet, a dwarf apple espalier trellis, but you have to get the soil back under the vines. So in a alternating row situation, or just in general, it requires an extra step, which I, over time really migrated away from this approach, even though to what are called harrows, which as they move through the vine rows are really good at getting weeds out without moving the soil out from under the vine. So I believe in the next image, we have a video of a machine that I did run for a number of years in Dry Creek Valley that was pretty effective. I'm not sure if the video is going to, there we go. It was pretty effective at so unfortunately, it doesn't look like at least on my end, the video's running very smoothly, but one of the things I think that's telling about that video is that it's being used on young vines, which sort of reinforces the fact that the sensor there is very responsive. And then the final machine in the images is the Kimco, which we use here at Turley. So last year was my first year with this machine, and it is a very robust, super strong machine. And I'd say that's really one of its major benefits. Here in St. Helena, and then also on Howell Mountain, the soils are extremely rocky. And so not gravelly, but big rocks. And so it really is important to have a machine that can withstand contact with big rocks, of course, a day. So so the Kimco is really, really good for that. It does run slower than some of the other machines that kind of preceded it in this discussion, but it is very sensitive and it is very strong. And then just sort of to kind of conclude my little chat here about undervine cultivation, and I'm going to assume people here are just kind of looking for basic information. One of the real important things is timing. So with all cultivation, soil moisture is very important. with undervine cultivation, it's really great if you can just limit it to one pass a year. So it's trying to get in there while there's still some moisture in the soil, but late enough in the season that you won't get any subsequent germination is a really important call to make. And then the other thing to keep in mind is if the cover crop or the weeds under the vine get too big or are also woody, they can trigger the sensor arm, which can leave a lot more cleanup work to be done after the machine passes through. Other things to mention are, infrastructure has to be arranged to accommodate the machine. So if there's drip hose or arms from head trained vines, those are things you're going to need to consider before you bring a machine in to cultivate a vineyard. Really good operator training and getting a really good, really focusing on speed. What's a safe speed to run the machine at without hurting the vines, and then sensor adjustment to make sure that as the machine's moving through, it's really responding to the sensor is responding to contacting the vines and not letting the harrow or the plow touch the vines, because in all cases with all this equipment, the equipment will chew up and spit out T-posts and vines in the blink of an eye. So it's really important to try to have all those things sorted out. So Keith, that's sort of my overview of machines I've used in the past.
Okay, thank you very much, Ned. That was really helpful to see those photos. I think it helps to get an image of what we're talking about. So thank you for sharing that and your experience. And we're going to hear from Stewart Bewley from Alder Springs Vineyard next. And then after we heard from him, I'll be asking some more questions. And then please populate the question and answer section of your Zoom, because I imagine there'll be quite a few from the attendees, and we want to hear what they are. Okay, thank you. Stewart, take it away.
Thank you very much for including me in this great program. Alder Springs Vineyard is located quite north in Mendocino County. All hillside vineyards. Most of our vineyards are in the range of 15 to 30% slope. And as a result of that, and we're also in a fairly high rainfall area, we have quite a number of salmon streams and steelhead spawning streams in the area of our vineyard. So we try and be very careful not to create any erosion. We've run a permanent cover crop for 28 years. We've never tilled the vineyard at all since the original establishment of each block. And we run a permanent cover crop between the rows of perennial bunch grasses and clovers primarily. Under vine, we have done a number of things, and we're trying to go towards a more sustainable and program under vine. The photograph you see here was an application of compost under vine. Now this was at the bottom of a hill in winter, and it was a pretty wet winter, but you can see where a certain percentage of the compost was kind of washed away by rain coming down the hill. Even though we have a nice permanent cover crop there, it just didn't seem satisfactory to us. And we've been working on all sorts of ideas for about 10 years to try and improve the undervine treatment. And we've tried a number of things, including compost, which obviously is great. But then we tried a method of about 3 or 4 inches of compost. And then we went over it with about 4 inches of wood chips for a mulch. Now this is right next door to the area that was, you could see where it was kind of eroding a little bit or taking away the compost. And this area seemed to do far better. And we also found that this conserved moisture tremendously. And we had really excellent earthworm populations, and it seemed to really hold the moisture in very well, seemed to protect the soil very well. It did take a heck of a lot of wood chips. I think we put on about 300 yards of wood chips per acre, something like that. It was just a mountain of wood chips. Fortunately, wood chips are fairly inexpensive in our area, at least. And so this has been one of the undervine treatments that we've done. We've done, obviously we've done no tilling at all. We found that in our area, if we did till, it just takes the soil right out from underneath the vines. Perhaps the method that we've tried that we're quite excited about is growing crops under vine. And we tried about 40 different species of plants. And this is a combination of clover and alyssum that you can see here. We've been working on this for about 10 years. And this worked out pretty well. Alyssum sometimes doesn't come back as well, but we include it in our mix at least. And we were looking for low growing plants that were not too aggressive. We did try perennial bunch grasses, and it seemed to, they have such aggressive and deep roots, it seemed to devigorate our vines significantly. Now this, we call this the experiment block at Alder Springs, and we grew about 20 different species. The ones that seemed to come out quite well were Dutch white clover, subclovers, and also Roman chamomile. This did pretty well as alyssum. And one of the things we noted was that it did devigorate the vines a little bit for the first 2 seasons. So it'd be helpful to add some kind of a nitrogen to make sure you didn't shorten the shoots and things like that. But it seemed like the vines kind of adjusted to the process.
Can folks hear me okay? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. We just lost him. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to Stewart.
I think his video just froze.
Yeah,
I don't know if we want to wait it out or if we want to move forward. I don't know.
Yeah, let's ask some questions of the other panelists and see if he doesn't come back. Let's stay on that topic though. That's a really important topic. And I imagine Carrie and Ned, you've dealt with this. Like, have you tried to establish grasses or other plants underneath the vine? And have you, what if you have you had success with? What do you think are good plants, or what are poor choices?
Do you want
Let's hear from Carrie first.
Okay. It's problematic for us because we put sheep through our vineyards. What was his name? Miguel Altieri tried to do some floral resource planting in our vineyards, and it just didn't work for us because the sheep come through and then just eat everything anyway. So we haven't really done anything other than our cover cropping under the vines.
Okay, let's hear from Ned, and then we'll give Stewart a chance to see if his audio works again after Ned gives his response.
Sure. I don't have any direct experience planting under vine, though it does look like a very attractive solution for a lot of different situations. I have seen it work successfully. my understanding is, and I think Stewart was alluding this, it takes a while to get, seasons to get an established crop that's appropriate under vine. But that to me looks like a really, great way of, in some situations, particularly where there's erosion potential.
Great, thank you. Stewart, let's give you another chance. You were speaking about the alyssum and under the vine when you cut out, and hopefully your video works now. And if it doesn't, we'll just get back to some other questions, but take it away, Stewart. Good luck.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, we did do the undervine different plantings. We used a Fisher twister for mowing the undervine, and our objective was to mow over the top of the planting. And there's a Fisher twister. It shows the spinning unit, which is kind of a heavy cord like a weed whacker. The unit itself is spring operated. It's not with a trip sensor, and it just goes around the vine. There was also a machine that Golden Vineyards, I noticed, had developed. This was a adapted Gearmore machine. Gearmore doesn't make this machine, but the vineyard manager at Golden Vineyards in north of Ukiah produced this machine, and it was kind of a disc on each side, and it was run on a SVL type tracked machine. It did quite a good job, and I'm looking to build one of these, I hope. It went pretty fast and seemed to do a really good job under the vine. This was photograph was taken at a event that Glenn McGorty put on up in Mendocino County. But right now we're using the Fisher twister, and the Fisher twister primarily is just being used to take out any weeds that grow higher than the cover crop. And so we don't take out the cover crop at all. We just let it go back to seed, and it acts as it develops some flowers and so forth. You can see this was right after it was mowed, and in the spring we probably do 2 mowings, maybe 3 would probably be better. Now you'll notice the drip hose has to be raised up a little higher than what would be normal. We put it up at about 24 inches, and the Fisher twister does require a fair bit of space to get under the vines and so forth. One of the advantages of the Fisher twister I found was it actually, those units, those orange items there hit the vine itself, and they kind of sucker the vine if you get it in spring, and they'll take off some of the lower suckers. They don't do a perfect job, but they probably reduce the cost of suckering somewhat, especially when they're in that vulnerable stage where they'll snap off relatively easily. Although right down by the ground, because we don't mow very low, they obviously don't take it off. But we found this system to be quite workable so far, and we're going to we've got about 35 acres this year that we've gone to this system. The one thing I like about this system is that because you're not tilling, you are allowing your fungal soil biology to prosper, whereas when you till, you have a tendency to favor bacteria, which are good, but grapevines are fungally dominant, and by tilling under the vine, it doesn't do the fungus very good because you're kind of chopping it up a little bit. So I'm not sure if this works per se much better. I don't have enough years of experience with it, but the theory at least is that you're helping the biology in the soil, as well as protecting the soil, and as well as not having to use chemicals.
Great, thank you, Stewart. That was really good, and thanks for bearing with us when you had that glitch with your audio. The question I have is, no one spoke to chemicals, whether conventional or organic. If we could do a go around, starting with Carrie, then Ned, then Stewart, about experience maybe you've had with either conventional or organic chemicals, and so what are some of the advantages and disadvantages, pluses and minuses you're seeing chemicals versus these types of mechanical situations and mulch that you're talking about?
I've only farmed organically ever for 20 years. So I really can't compare and contrast, but we did try that weed slayer last year and it was effective, but the grass or the weeds grew back fairly quickly with it. But I find mechanical pruning, undervine management to be highly effective, and I don't really see the need for undervine chemical treatments.
Ned, we'd like to hear from you.
Well, like Carrie, I don't have experience with chemical management, so I really can't speak to personal experience.
Stewart, have you used chemicals before?
I have. We've used chemicals, Roundup primarily, or and some other chemicals occasionally. They're inexpensive, they're effective, but I don't think that they're the best thing either for the soil. And I think that the world is changing, and our winery clients are really interested in moving away from Roundup and other chemicals. And it seems to be a trend that is building and has been building over the years. And that's why we started to look in another direction. And but I think that the chemicals definitely are effective and they're definitely inexpensive. They just, they're probably not the best for the vines. They're probably not the best for the wine quality. And they're certainly not the best for the environment.
Okay, I have one more question related to that, Stewart, and it's really kind of two pieces of it, is that I often in vineyards see where people have been using, either pre-emergence and or more Roundup types of chemicals, and you get kind of a more hardened zone with very few grasses, and like I say, it's hard. It's a brown and somewhat, I don't want to say concrete, but it's very hard. How do you, how would you rehabilitate that? And how do you establish grasses under the vine? What's the process of doing that in that zone?
I would say rehabilitating, banding compost would be a nice start. And as a matter of fact, that's how we do our grasses also. We band about a little less than a truckload per acre. So that's about 25 tons per acre, or somewheres in that range. And then we go through and mix up a mix of seed, and we put it in with a kind of a carrier, some other materials and so forth, maybe even compost and so forth. And then we put it on by hand, and then we rake it in with a very light rake, raking by hand. And you only have to do it once. So it's a little expensive to put it out on a per acre basis, but we, at the end of the season last year, now granted, we had forest fires and we didn't pick a lot of our grapes last year, like many people in the industry. So we had a little bit of time, and we went out and did about 20 acres last year, seeding under the vines, composting, and then raking it in lightly. Keith, you're on mute, I think.
It's interesting. Do either of the other panelists have comments on that? Okay. Seeing none, I'm wondering, have either of the other panelists, have you tried mulching under the vine? Has that been something you have experience with?
I have not, though I have seen something similar to what Stewart's done in Australia with oat straw and wheat straw, where they have machines that band under the vines a berm, basically almost 2 feet of straw, and it's really great for weed suppression and, as he was mentioning, soil moisture conservation. It's a really great way to keep the soil alive.
Okay, good. That's good to know. And I think it's important to let the folks who are participating, that this might be old news to a lot of folks, but Weed Slayer was a relatively new product, and people were saying it was more effective than some of the other organic alternatives, but it was banned. People got a cease and desist letter in the past year. So that's an option that is off the table. So if any other folks, attendees, have other experiences with other alternatives to conventional chemicals that they might want to share, you might want to put that in the chat. So my next, I would like to return to you mentioned the rocky soil, Ned, and I've certainly seen some vineyards that, have quite a bit of rocks in there. I would like to hear from others. I don't know if Stewart or Carrie deal with this, but, for hillside and rocky environments, like what can you tell folks on that are attending about like different approaches to manage this, and maybe what's worked and hasn't? Ned, maybe you want to go first.
There we go. Yeah. So in terms of, well, like I say, with the rocky soils and undervine cultivation, that Kimco seems to work really, really well. With hillside, the steeper you get, the I would say the less attractive cultivation can become. Limiting by either going kind of alternate row or just undervine would be great approaches. Also, in really tight spacings where there really isn't effective machinery right now for managing undervine, it's a little bit medieval, I guess, in a way, but weed eaters is another approach that does work. Again, timing's really important, but yeah, I would say those, for the hillsides, things change quite a bit, and erosion's a major concern.
Thank you. Do either of the other panelists want to comment on that?
We don't, Alder Springs, we don't really have a very rocky, big rocks or anything like that. We've got more of a gravelly type or loam soils. But we've found, at least, and now we have no experience whatsoever in cultivation, but we found that some of these undervine mowers, like the Fisher Twister and this one that the Golden Vineyard had developed, were pretty good at fairly tight spacing. We are at 3 feet between the vines, and we can get in and out of those things pretty effectively, and not at a great pace, probably similar to undervine cultivation, maybe a little faster. But that Fisher Twister does actually hit the vines themselves. So it kind of takes a touch of the bark off. But if you go too slow, it'll take too much bark off. So you actually have to go at a reasonable pace, about, let's say, 3 miles an hour. And that does sucker, but it also does take a little bit of the bark off. But so far, we have not seen that to be a problem at all.
Carrie, it looked like you had a comment.
Oh, I was just going to say that the Pelonk sunflowers work fairly well on hillside, not too steep. Our steepest hillside, which is terraced, we actually do have to use weed whackers, and old-fashioned weed whackers work fine. Not for huge tracts of land, but for our smaller, 4 or 5 acre vineyards. We get a crew out there. And then we also use shovel crews where we have super big vines. We spot weed with a shovel crew that goes through, but that's not what you want to do for all of your larger vineyards, but it is effective too.
Okay.
Keith, we have 5 minutes left.
Okay, great. And I might start the question and answer a little bit early because we have quite a few that are building up, which is great. Thank you, folks, for participating and entering those. I'm wondering if any of the instruments you showed, I wasn't sure I saw mowers in there, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on mowing under the vine and what the options are there compared to some of these more cultivation types of opportunities. Which approach is better? So maybe let's hear from Ned, then Carrie, then Stewart.
Sure, I'm not sure I would necessarily go to better. I would say that different situations require different responses. Mowing and not cultivating is really attractive on a lot of different levels. I've definitely managed, a 30-acre hillside vineyard with no cultivation and had some, really great success in parts of the vineyards and moderate in others. But then I think other vineyards respond well to cultivation, particularly with water demand. And I would say, here at Turley, old vine, dry farmed vineyards, we definitely favor cultivating those. Again, just trying to eliminate as much competition as possible.
I purchased a Fisher mower about, I think it was 3 years ago now, and it works fairly well, but you have to do it when the growth is fairly small. Otherwise, it doesn't. It's not as effective. So we try to get out there as soon as we can, when we can, after rains and the ground dries up and we can run a tractor over it. But that's my only mower that I have for under the vine. We've tried Kimcos and Bianos, and they're fairly difficult to maintain. So this is, the scheme that we've come up with is the Pelonk and the Fisher mower and weed whackers and shovel crew. And that's pretty much it.
Great, thank you. Stewart?
Well, we've got the Fisher Twister. Now we use a Chris Grow, an Australian version that is being made in Lodi for mowing between the rows, very heavy duty machine. The only undervine mower we currently have is the Fisher Twister, and it both mows the cover crop and under the vine simultaneously. And it's a little bit expensive. It's an expensive machine, about $26,000. It's handled in Sonoma County. There's a dealer, and they're pretty good guys to work with and so forth. It takes a little while to get the machine. I think it's been a good machine, but there are not a lot of machines out there. I think Perfect has a undervine that you can add on to their equipment. I have not tried that. It looks like a good machine though. And, it's going to take us a little while to get much more experience. Most of our process was just trying to determine whether it really worked to have plants underneath the vine, or if it would devigorate it so much or become such a problem that we couldn't do it. So far, we're seeing fairly good results, but we don't have a lot of experience with a lot of different machines, frankly.
Great, thank you. That was excellent, all of you. That was all great stuff. And I want to turn it over to the question and answer from the attendees now. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to be turning it over to Anya Starovoitov, my coworker, but I do want to say before I do that, as I'm about to let Anya take the helm, that there's a lot of interest in this topic. And at Sonoma RCD, we try to do quarterly soil health kind of topics. COVID has changed that a bit, and the other RCDs involved with the North Coast Soil Hub are all doing a lot of good soil health workshops. And Under the Vine is something we really want to emphasize and help people understand, because there's a lot to it there, obviously. And I will say there's some great stuff happening in the chat and some comments going to the presenters as well. So everyone take a look there, but question and answer put there. And Anya, thank you so much for leading this part, and take it away.
Absolutely. There's lots of questions coming in, so I'll try to pick the more exciting ones. And I apologize ahead of time to folks that we will not be able to get to all the questions. The first one is actually for all three panelists. And the question is, how have the soil treatments you've applied, have you seen any results in notable changes on how much irrigation water is required for the vine? So are you seeing any changes in how much water you need to apply? And maybe we can start with Carrie.
I wasn't around when they transitioned from conventional, but now we apply very little water, very little irrigation water, maybe about, in the very hottest months, 6 gallons a week per vine. But we don't start until maybe the middle of July, and, a couple of times in August, and then maybe a little bit in September, and that's about it. So yeah, it does help retain water quite a bit. We do have a lot of organic matter in our soil, a lot of residual cover crop, and incorporated pruning. So I do think it helps quite a bit.
I would say it really, in my experience, it's very site dependent. So soil type, rootstock, cultivar spacing. So in some situations, no-till, I think Stewart alluded to this, there may be a kind of an adjustment period for the vines, but then, they can go on to be, have a pretty well-adjusted existence without a lot of, or change in supplemental irrigation, or even dry farm in some situations. But other situations, that's, in my experience, has not been the case. And cultivation really does help minimize water demand.
Our experience is that we do not irrigate more in the blocks that we have the undervine cover crop. We do find that we can irrigate less where we put the wood chips. That really conserves the water. If I had a real water shortage issue, I think I might play around with that idea a little bit. It seems like the moisture holding capacity of that is excellent. I'm not sure that the weed suppression is always as excellent as the moisture holding capacity. Now we have a certain amount of gopher activity. They seem to disrupt the wood chips quite a bit, and that will allow some weeds to get going a little bit more. If you had some kind of a spot system where you could spot treat weeds, like vinegar or something like that, I think that might be effective in combination with the wood chips. So far, we're finding a little bit of weed escape with the wood chips. That's the one that really retains the water. The undervine cover crop, not so much. Where we are, we do have a lot of water, so it's not that big a problem. And we're also on devigorated rootstocks that are fairly shallow rooting, Riparian 10114, 420A, that sort of thing. So, we don't have the 110Rs and the 140 rugaries that go real deep and are real ideal for dry farming. So the undervine cover crop does not conserve water per se.
All right, thank you all. Stewart, since you were just chatting about the mulch, let me throw another question. There's lots of questions coming in about the mulch. And so if you could maybe reemphasize what type of mulch or what the source is, and how often you've had to reapply and whether you've seen any downsides with the mulch.
We got our mulch from a lumber mill, and those guys have a tendency to have tons of that stuff. They're sending truckloads of it all over the place. Where we are, we were paying about $500 a load plus trucking for the mulch, and now we were fairly close, so we were able to get it for about $700 a truckload. There's about 85 to 100 yards per truckload, so it's fairly lightweight, and it was a huge pile of for every truck. In this particular case, it was either Doug fir or redwood chips. We found that the chips persisted really well. We've been doing this for about 8 years. We put the first application on just a few rows, and it seemed to persist very well. And you could hardly tell that they had deteriorated after 3 years. Now, we went back and top dressed it again right over the top. And that worked really well. I would say the downsides to the wood chips are, one, the piece of equipment that does the spreading has to be well suited to that. There's some spreaders that'll kind of bind up with the chips and stuff like that. The second thing is it does take a lot of chips. And the third thing is, the downside is you do get some escapes. The one thing is, if you have any guys in there, the weeds pull out so easily and quickly, it's amazing. Whereas if I'm trying to pull a weed in some just regular part of the vineyard, unless it's, winter and the soil's really wet, you're not getting it out. But under those mulch, even in the late summer or fall, you can pull those weeds out just really easily.
All right, thank you for sharing that. All right, another question kind of broadly for the entire group is, could you speak to or give a rough sense of the cost per acre for the different treatments under the vine row that you've described that are sort of predominant in your management? And maybe we'll start with Ned.
I don't have those numbers at my fingertips. I'm kind of notorious for not carrying numbers in my head, but I will say again, that can be highly variable depending on spacing and the machinery you're using, because essentially, there's the initial investment in the equipment, and then it's a question of labor and maintenance.
How about Stewart or Carrie? Could you speak to a little bit about costs?
I'm really sorry. I don't have the cost per acre either at my fingertips, but I know, it's a little more expensive than just going and spraying Roundup, but I think overall it's better for the vines and the environment and the wine. So, you have to balance that cost too with your own economic costs. So I'm sorry, but the other thing that we do is, having sheep, it reduces our mowing and undervine cultivation costs. I think we save about 2 passes. And somebody way back in the day, I think they came up with $500 an acre in savings, but I don't want to use that because I don't know I don't know what it is right now. So
we have 1 more minute.
Wait, I'm not going to give you much more information either. We don't have the costs either, and I do know that the undervine treatments, whether it's mowing or the mulch, is probably going to be a little more expensive than Roundup for sure. And now the mulch, the good part is we lay down a fair amount of compost first, and then we put the mulch over it. And that's to keep the mulch from devigorating the vines by pulling nitrogen out of the soil. But that's a fairly expensive process. However, after that, we really don't do hardly anything at all. except maybe try and deal with some of the escaped weeds for a few years. So in a way, on a yearly basis, the mulch is cheaper, but the initial process is a little more expensive. But you are putting a massive amount of carbon onto the vineyard, because, you know, if you're talking 2 or 3 truckloads per acre, at a 85 to 100 yards per acre, per truckload, that's a lot of carbon. And but the costs are, once you've accomplished it, are lower.
All right, thank you. Well, it looks like we are unfortunately out of time for any more questions, and there's lots of great chatter in the Q&A, and I believe our panelists have access to that window. So if you did want to look in and see if you wanted to answer some of the questions directly. Otherwise, folks are suggested to just reach out to either the RCD or some of the panelists if you wanted to follow up on a question. And I will pass it back to Miguel. Thank you so much.